Really excited to be here, as I said. Amazing to sort of have this opportunity and forum. Thank you, Arnas and Tom, for inviting me and putting this together. Lovely group of people. So I would like this session. I'm going to spend. I know you guys have allocated like a large chunk of time, and I don't want to be the only one talking throughout this large chunk of time. So I would love for this session to be as interactive as possible. And so I'm going to spend maybe about 15, 20 minutes taking you guys through a couple of presentations on, this is a bit too loud, let me, a couple of presentations on some of the principles that I think have been super instrumental for my success. For everything that I've built so far, me and my younger brother have had a couple of different exits and successes. I'm currently on my way, as Tom mentioned, to build out a bunch of new companies that I'm passionate about, and really some of the fundamental principles that have been instrumental for my success. But then after that, I want to throw the floor open for questions. I've been warned that Lithuanians tend to be a bit more shy. And so the thing is that if you don't ask questions, I will start asking you questions. So now you got to decide which side of the line you guys want to be on. But would love to make this much more interactive. Feel free. I'm an open book, by the way. You can ask me anything, including whether this ring means that I'm engaged or not, or literally any question. I'll be more than happy to help and answer in whichever way I can assist. And share my experiences, talk about lessons. Feel free to ask me questions on my companies, my history, leadership challenges that you guys might be facing, mistakes that I have made in my life, and God knows I've made a lot of mistakes in my life to get to where I am. And so, as I said, yeah, please feel free to do that. Just a quick show of hands. How many people here are part of some startup or running a startup or in a startup, etc.? Somehow it's all lopsided to one side of the room. What do people on this side of the room do? Did you by chance walk into the wrong room or something? So that's amazing. And any sort of investors out here? Any folks that do investments, etc.? Okay, a couple of them. All right, awesome. Students? A few students also. Okay, so we have a nice mix of people. Awesome. So. I'm just using this as information for me to create my list of questions for you guys, as I said, in case nobody starts asking any questions. So let me start off with this presentation that I call The Game of Business. I won't spend too much time on my background. Tom and Arnas already sort of covered some of that. I'll just give you sort of a quick, short overview. And then if anybody is interested to learn more, we will have opportunity during the question phase to feel free to ask me questions. I've been fortunate enough to sort of find my passion early on. So I started coding when I was 10 years old. Born and raised in India, in Mumbai. Has anybody here been to India? How many people have been to India? Fair number of people. Lithuania and Vilnius, actually, this is my first visit here, by the way. And my hosts are going to be kind enough to actually show me around tomorrow. I'm really excited. It's actually my first visit to this part of the world in many ways, which is embarrassing, actually, given the amount of travel that I've already done. But it reminds me so much of India in many ways also, right? Like the people here, the culture here, even the startup community here, in many ways reminds me a lot about like the way things are and were in India. So yeah, I was 10 years old. I was in the school called Arya Vidya Mandir in Bandra, and I was in 6th grade. And my school installed the very first computer room in my school at that point in time when I was 10 years old. This was before the internet, so it was 1989. Before the internet, before. We had these green-colored monochrome terminals, x86 machines running, so there was no Windows. It was MS-DOS and CC++ and GW Basic. We had these big 5 1/4-inch floppy drives, so no hard disks, etc. So it's early days, and I was hooked. I was in love with computer science. I would spend all my time, short breaks, lunch breaks, every single waking hour that I could. So we couldn't afford a computer back at home. My parents couldn't buy me one, at least as yet. And so I would spend all my time, even after school, the computer teacher would leave the keys to the computer room with me. I would spend 3 hours every day after school just reading books and trying stuff out myself and learning on my own. It also helped there was a boys-only school, so there were no other distractions. So, so computers was the only, the computer room was the only sort of distraction available for me. And I mean, I knew early on, so I read a lot of books on computer science. I also read a lot of biographies back then, and I really already had developed this passion of I want to be an entrepreneur and I want to do something in computers, right? So as I said, I was really fortunate enough to find my passion early on. And I'll say this, this is not part of this presentation, but one of the things I'll talk about, especially for the folks who are still studying or are students here, one of the biggest advice that I can give you guys is to find a career in something you'd gladly do for free. Money is just a side effect. We were talking about it this morning. It's it's an outcome. It's a side event, but really pursue your passion, and success will automatically follow, right? One of my favorite Steve Jobs quotes is, he says, "Find something you love to do so much that you can't wait for the sun to rise to do it all over again." And that's how I felt about computer science and about programming, right? I couldn't wait, I couldn't put myself to sleep. I couldn't wait to wake up the next day to again try this new program or complete this software that was writing the previous day or solve a bug that was, that was difficult to find or whatever. Like, I was so passionate about it, right? So anyways, I found my passion early on, started my first company along with my younger brother when I was 17. In the same space as Arnas's company, Hostinger. So we were selling, hosting, domain names. We became an accredited registrar, got to about 9.5, 10 million customers worldwide. Subsequently sold that company to a public company called Endurance. So that was our first exit. My brother actually went on to take an offshoot from it and start a company called Media.net, which we then exited in a transaction to a public company based in China. And I currently run 3 companies, which I don't recommend as a general recipe. In fact, one of the principles I speak about is focus. I got tempted, and eventually here I am with no social life and no semblance of anything else. But it's exciting, and the good part is that I do have some really amazing people, which is the only reason I can do what I do, that actually keep the lights running in all respects. So I run a company called Radix, which I have management and a CEO for. It's again in the domain name space. We own various top-level extensions like .online, .tech, .store. I run a company called Flock, which is competing directly with Google and Microsoft on an Office suite. Well, not an Office suite per se, but a productivity and a communication suite. So we have email, contacts, calendar, messaging, video calling, and things of that. And I co-founded a company called Zeta with another gentleman in India, which is in the digital payment space. So that's sort of my background. Uniquely, all of my companies so far have been either bootstrapped or self-funded, at least until now. So the first 2 exits were entirely organically grown to start with, together, and then Media.net by my brother, and then subsequently Radix, Flock, and Zeta, all kind of self-funded and organically grown so far, and looking at scaling it up from there on. But anyways, now that's sort of a quick overview on the background. As I said, these are 3 sort of companies that I'm currently running, and let's get into really the meat of this presentation. By the way, I'll just again quick temperature check. Is the pace okay? Is everybody here able to understand and follow me? Okay. All right. Just wanted to quickly check that. Sometimes I'm told I talk too fast, so I have to consciously slow myself down. So this is the part that I want to really talk about, which is I want to share with you guys in this presentation. Then I'll probably, depending on how many of you ask fun questions, I might even do another one, depending on how much time we have. The principles of success. So people can ask me all the time, what resulted in success, and I could talk about 20, 50 different things. Sometimes some of the most fundamental things are actually the most valuable ones. And over time, I've learned a lot of lessons that have enabled me to distill, I think, some of the most instrumental aspects of success for our businesses. And what I've really found is that business in many ways is so much like a game. So the principles that are relevant for success in a game, in sports. How many people here are fan of various different sports? Yeah, lots of people again. This side of the room seems much more responsive than this side, so we're gonna have to warm up this side in some form. Maybe shuffle up a bunch of people here and there. And the principles of success in business in many ways are similar to principles of success in a game. And the first principle, by the way, if I leave you, so I'm gonna talk about 5, but if I leave you with any one principle, that's the most important ever, and that I really truly believe in, that I've taken to heart, is this principle, which is hiring the best people, right? I cannot possibly overstate the importance of this principle when it comes to success. And really, when you think about sports, sports gets this like principle to such a extreme level, right? In sports, you have these scouts that will track and follow players right from their high school days and keep pitching them for many, many, many years to draft them in their teams. And they really spend a lot of time. They'll track every single statistic of this player right from the time they were playing from school days, etc. They'll do their best to accumulate the absolute best team ever, right? How many of us can say that that's the kind of effort we spend when we're choosing employees for our organization? In fact, I mean, how many of us can say that we spend that kind of effort in choosing our girlfriends and spouses, right? Like, really, the amount of science, effort, and energy that goes behind finding the best people in sports is something we can really take a lot of inspiration from. And I've learned this over a long period of time. We've constantly, starting with DirectEye and then Media.net and then Radix, Flock, and Zeta, we've constantly raised the bar of the people that we hire in our organization to a point where sometimes now I actually feel that if I left the organization and interviewed back for my company, there's a chance I might not make it through. But we've constantly raised the bar, and it's super interesting to see the effect and the impact of it, right? Which is that A players love working with A players, so the moment you hire some of the best people, you actually automatically end up attracting the best people on a constant basis, right? It makes work so much more enjoyable. I love going into work every day. I say this because there are so many times every single day that I'm actually proven wrong by my people. Like, I'll come up with an idea, and somebody else on the team will be like, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. And they'll prove to me with data and analytics that it doesn't make sense. And it's just so much more fun and challenging, right? The thing that I really... a lot of people don't realize, in fact, in India, this used to be even more difficult to sort of understand this impact of hiring the best people, is that it's not just about the fact that you'll typically find that A players will, many people talk about the advantages of sort of more amount of efficiency and productivity. So somebody who's a rock star might get 3x or 5x the amount of work done as compared to like somebody who's relatively average and things like that. But the more important variable that I've always found is that between A players and B players, between hiring the best and hiring the average, there are some things that you will just never be able to do. And the possibilities that open up when you hire the absolute best players, when you hire the absolute best people, is what makes a dramatic difference between sort of exponential success versus kind of average and moderate success, right? As an example, I mean, this is Usain Bolt. He's like the fastest runner, runs at I think about 47 kilometers an hour, faster than my mom drives her car. And so if I take 100 average athletes, right, there's 100 of them, can 100 average athletes combined together, their athletic power, brain power, can they beat one Usain Bolt? They can't. They just can't do it. You can't just take 100 people and pitch them against this one person and say, hey, go ahead and do what he's doing or beat him, right? Or can I take 100 average musicians and say, okay, build something or make something that's better than Beethoven? You just can't do it. So you can't substitute quality with quantity. And a lot of people feel like, yeah, okay, I'll hire a bunch of average people, but I'll have strength in numbers. The thing is, the kind of possibilities that open up for your company, business, startup, organization, team, if you have the best of the players, there are some things that you just won't be able to do without them. And you won't even realize it unless you actually proactively keep sort of improving that bar, right? One of the principles that we have in our company, and again, feel free to shoot questions about this in terms of our processes and tactics of hiring the best people post facto. But one of the things that we fundamentally believe in is that every person who we add to our organization should be additive in nature, meaning that they should raise the average score of our companies. If I could objectively score every individual in the organization, the next person to walk in should improve that average. So every time if I'm hiring over the mean of my company, I'm constantly improving my average. And so we'll talk about this a bit more, but this is the first principle that I want to talk to you guys about. The second principle, I love the verbiage of this, right? Which is coach, don't manage. And this is something that I really love about sports, which is in sports, you don't have managers, you have coaches. And there's a massive difference when you look at the sort of the underlying meaning behind this, right? Managers manage. They manage work, they manage tasks, they're looking at checklists of things that they assign to people and project managing stuff to get it done, etc. Coaches, they empower. In fact, interestingly enough, in sports, if you think about it, the coach actually never plays the game, right? As managers, we're constantly sitting and working ourselves to get our company ahead, but coaches are always empowering their players to be the best, to do the best on the field. They're not out there, kicking the ball or hitting the ball or whatever it is, right? They're not out there playing the game. Their fundamental role is I've hired the best team, and how do I coach them and mentor them to actually deliver the absolute best, right? And so, all the players must know how to play the game. Imagine, if you will, in a soccer game, if a coach said, well, there's just, 10 players on the field. I don't know what the actual number is supposed to be. But I will just, they don't need to necessarily know how to play the game. It's just a small number of people. I will just direct them, manage them real time. So I will constantly shout out instructions at everyone saying, hey, you pass the ball to this other guy, and why don't you run like 100 yards and now make another pass? It's just 10 players, right? So I should be able to do that fairly easily, right? It's almost like playing foosball on a foosball table versus actually playing a true game of soccer, right? You can't do that even with 10 people. But imagine how many of us in companies find managers doing that sometimes with 100 people. It's like, oh yeah, I don't need to teach them about how to do the stuff. I will just keep giving them task lists, and I will keep, getting updates from them, and we'll manage to make this company work, right? And to me, that's the fundamental difference. As a leader, as a CEO, as a startup manager, as a team lead, your job is to coach your team and to help them get the best out of themselves, and not to do things yourself and not to manage them on a constant basis. So this is another metaphor that I really, really like. When all employees understand the dynamics of business, everyone can feel, think, and act like management. And so imagine the kind of change that you can create when every one of your individual employees or people in your companies can act, think like management. When they have the same information that you have, when they have the same skill set, they're constantly being mentored, and they can actually act and think like you, and everybody can proactively take decisions that are best for your organization. Principle number 3 is define the long-term vision. And this is, again, something that, in sports, by default, there's always a long-term goal. And then it's broken down into a bunch of milestones, and you kind of focus on the current milestone, right? So whether it's to win the nationals, or win my, school competition, or win the regional competition, or win the Super Bowl, there's always a clear long-term vision. And every single player knows what that goal is. And how many of us can talk about that for our organizations? How many of us can say very clearly, a company of whether it's 10 people or 10,000 people, where every single individual in the company, you wake them up at any time in the middle of the night, and they can say, this is what my organization is trying to do. This is their long-term purpose. These are the milestones that we're trying to achieve. How many individuals can say that, right? And in games, it's so much more easier. Not just sports, even just games in general. I love all sorts of games because of these reasons, that all of them sort of imbibe all of these principles fundamentally. When you're playing a video game, you always know what your final goal is. It's to kill the big boss at the end of the 10th level, etc. And then it's broken down into 10 different levels. And there's always visibility in terms of what the long-term goal is and what the immediate near-term milestones are. And as a business, it's important. It's super important. No business, not any business can take credit, including I myself, can take credit, or the biggest ones in the world, can take credit for building their success entirely because of one person or because of a small set of individuals. Success in all our organizations is a function of all of the individuals that are working together to create it. And if people are not clearly aligned and don't clearly know where they want to go or where your organization wants to go, you're going to end up, having the ship move in 20 different directions, basically. So there are lots of tools that organizations can use in terms of planning processes to get that kind of alignment, to have a very clear vision that kind of create that behavior. But whatever it is, whatever tools you use, it's very important to create that clear long-term vision and long-term objective. In fact, it's very clear. One of my favorite authors is this guy called Simon Sinek. Has anybody here seen his videos? Yeah, so he's got this really amazing book called Start With Why, which came out of also a TED Talk that he gave quite some time ago. And he really talks about this whole notion of purpose, right? All of us, everybody in my company, I myself, I mean, we're doing what we're doing because we're driven towards a purpose. You want to start with why you're doing something. And so people in your organization need to be very clear about why you're doing, what's the purpose of the organization, and what is it that you're trying to achieve. And I think that's what drives people, motivates people, and ensures that everybody's moving in the right direction. Also ensures you can course correct, right? Because if you hire hundreds of smart people, well, it's foolhardy to not be clear and not be aligned in terms of where all of you are looking to go, because at least now you have so many people with all their eyes on the same problem. So that's principle number 3. Another one of my favorite principles, so this is my second favorite one after hiring the best, again, borrowed heavily from sports, which I think we can, again, be really, really inspired from, is the notion of keeping the score, right? Which is that if you look at games and sports, they measure everything. They measure everything. I mean, again, I'm sort of an outcast in India, by the way, because I don't actually follow almost any sports, including cricket, which, in many ways, it's like committing social suicide in the country. But the little kind of limited knowledge that I do have, about the game, I mean, it's phenomenal. For every single player in the game, they will have historical statistics going back to 10 years. Like the total number of runs that this person's ever scored, the total number of times he's gotten out, the total number of centuries. For any particular game, they will have wind direction, ball speed, where did it land, how many times the ball was hit in which direction of the field. Like every single statistic is measured. Every single statistic is available publicly. They put it up out there on the scoreboard, on the television screen or whatever. Everybody can see all of these important metrics at all points in time. How many of us can say in our businesses that we actually, one, have a habit of actually measuring metrics that are important, and two, make it available and public to all of the players, which is the even more important part of this entire process, right? I mean, imagine if you will, again, I'll take the reference of cricket. Imagine if you will, we have two teams that are playing a game of cricket, and we tell them, we're like, hey, guys, you go out there and play. We're not going to tell you the score. We're not going to tell you who's winning. At the end of the game, we'll tell you who's won. But just go out there and play, right? So, people are throwing the balls. People are hitting. Nobody has a target in mind. Nobody knows what the other team has scored. Nobody, unless they have infallible memory, they're not going to know exactly what's happened till now. Will you actually be able to play that game successfully? Will you be able to win? Will you be able to, make decisions in terms of whether you should be aggressive or conservative? You can't. You can't do that in a 2-hour cricket game, and we run businesses for 2 years or 20 years in that manner without exposing any metrics or statistics to our people in our organization and expecting them to take decisions on a constant basis that will actually get us to our outcome or goal. Forget the fact that you won't reach your goal. It's not even fun. I mean, will you play a game with a competing team where you don't know the score? It's not even going to be fun. It's not enjoyable. It's not motivating. So this is something that I really love about sports, that they literally measure every single variable for posterity and make it available to everybody out there. One of the fundamental principles that I believe in is you cannot improve something that you don't measure. You can't. You just can't. And that applies to an organization. As an organization, you cannot improve something you don't measure. And once you measure it, you need to be able to make that information available to the people who are taking the decisions on a daily basis to actually make those improvements. So, principle number 4 is keeping the score. Principle number 5, this is another interesting thing about games, is principle of line of sight. Which, fundamentally and fortunately enough, games actually by default have it. In organizations, we have to create it. And what I mean by this is that in any game, every player can link every single action that they take to the final outcome. If I did something in a game of cricket or a game of soccer or any game that I'm playing, baseball, if I hit a ball or if I get out or if I get a wicket, or if I score a goal, or I just pass the ball to somebody, every action that I take, I can link it to the final outcome. I'm like, okay, I did this action, Did it help or did it not help? Did it take away from or did it actually get us further down the path of the goal? There's amazing line of sight by default built in, which is that each individual can understand if I perform actions A, B, C, D, E, it actually helped me achieve this outcome. And that's so important again in business, right? How can we make sure that every individual in our organizations has the ability to link every single action that they perform on a micro and macro level every single day? How can they link that action to the final outcome, to the final objective or goal of the company? Did they actually help the company? And you'll find this again in poorly run companies. A lot of people will do a lot of work, but nobody knows. If you catch anybody and say, okay, hey, you know, what did you do today? They'll be like, yeah, I was so busy, I did all these things. But then if you ask them to say, okay, well, how did it help the company? They'll fail to be able to explain as to how the actions that they performed on that particular day actually link to the short-term and long-term objectives of the company. And so it's really important for us as leaders, for us as founders, etc., to be able to create this line of sight where individuals in our organization can link every action that they take and they'll be like, yeah, I mean, you know, I did this, and this is how it helped the organization. This is what it did. This is the difference that it made in the organization, right? So that's pretty much the 5 principles I wanted to cover. Hire the absolute best. You know, the thing about hiring the best is you can take a bunch of average players or average or below average players and give them the best environment, the best coaching, the best resources, the best capital, and you'll still end up with a very low probability of success. But you take a team of the absolute best people, and you might not have the best capital and the best resources and the best environment, you still have far higher odds of success. Hiring the best people is actually the cheapest use of capital that you can possibly make, as opposed to anything else that you throw capital on. Principle 2, coach, don't manage. Love that about sports. As I said, just that metaphorical change. I remember this small anecdote of, as a young person, I remember I went to this really successful ad agency that I was working with in some form, and they were talking about anecdotes of the CEO there, and one of the things I remember, these stories they told me is that they told me about this time when this person was stuck at something on Photoshop or whatever, and the CEO of the company comes along, and this guy's stuck and doesn't know how to do what he needs to do. And so the CEO actually says, okay, let me help you, let me show you. So he sits there, he finishes the entire, task that this person's supposed to do, shows it to him saying that you got that, and then he deletes it all and says, okay, now you go ahead and do it, right? And to me, that was so fundamentally important and critical, right? His job is not to get the task done. His job was to show the person how to get the task done and help them improve themselves so they get the opportunity to sort of, go down that path. So coach, don't manage. Set a long-term vision. Keep score. You cannot improve something that you don't measure. And put into place processes that individuals in your organization can get a line of sight in terms of every action they take, how does it actually help the organization achieve its objectives. A company performs best when its people see themselves as partners in the business, when they concern themselves not just with doing their day-to-day jobs, but with the actual business objectives of the company. So you need to empower this team that you build to be able to align themselves with the true business objectives of the organization. And that concludes this presentation. Thank you.